By day, he was a police officer, a husband, and a father, a pillar of his community. He was the guy you'd trust, the neighbor you'd wave to across the lawn. But by night, he was something else entirely. He was California's most feared predator, and he was using his badge not to protect, but to hunt. This is the unbelievable story of how a cop became one of the most prolific serial killers in American history and got away with it for 40 years. This is the story of Joseph James DeAngelo, a man who lived a life of terrifying contradictions. The world would come to know him by many names: the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, and finally, the Golden State Killer. For decades, he was a ghost, a boogeyman who haunted an entire state, leaving a trail of shattered lives in his wake. And the whole time, the man behind the mask was hiding in plain sight. The terror started not with a bang, but with a series of unsettling intrusions in the sun-drenched town of Visalia, beginning as early as 1974. A shadowy figure, soon dubbed the Visalia ransacker, was breaking into over 100 homes. He wasn't just stealing things, he was invading the most private spaces of people's lives, sometimes lingering, moving personal items and creating a sense of violation that went far beyond any material loss. Then, on September 11, 1975, the ransacker became a killer. Claude Snelling was shot and killed trying to stop a masked intruder from kidnapping his teenage daughter. Fear gripped the community, but the killer's identity remained a complete mystery. The ransacker seemed to vanish from Visalia, but he had just moved his hunting ground. In 1976, a new wave of horror began in the suburbs of Sacramento County. A predator, soon named the East Area Rapist, started a brutal campaign of home invasions and sexual assaults. His methods were chillingly methodical. He'd pry open a window or a sliding glass door in the dead of night, targeting women who were home alone or with their partners. He would bind them, blindfold them, and terrorize them for hours, sometimes stopping to eat their food before ransacking their belongings and leaving them with psychological scars that would never heal. The community was paralyzed with a fear like nothing they had ever seen before. On February 2, 1978, the East Area Rapist became a murderer again. Brian and Katie Majori were shot to death while walking their dog in Rancho Cordova. The senseless killings proved this phantom would do anything to avoid being caught. He went on to commit over 50 rapes across Sacramento, Stockton, and other Northern California communities, even taunting police and his victims with terrifying phone calls. And then, just as abruptly as they'd started, the attacks in Northern California stopped in 1979. The case went cold, but the nightmare was far from over. While California trembled, Joseph DeAngelo was living a life of startling normalcy. Born in 1945, he served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War before getting a degree in criminal justice. He got married, had children, and in 1973, he pinned on a badge. DeAngelo became a police officer in the town of Exeter, serving from 1973 to 1976 in the very same county where the Visalia ransacker was active. Then he transferred to the police department in Auburn, a city near Sacramento, working there from 1976 to 1979, right in the heart of the East Area Rapist territory. Let that sink in. The man who was breaking into homes and destroying lives was at the same time carrying a gun and a badge. His police training almost certainly gave him an edge, an inside understanding of investigations and how to avoid leaving clues. He knew how to blend in, how to be invisible. His career in law enforcement ended in 1979 when he was fired after being caught shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent, items that sound chillingly familiar when you know what he was doing in his other life. After that, he became a truck mechanic, eventually retiring and settling down as a grandfather in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Citrus Heights, a community he had once terrorized. For nearly 36 years, the monster was just a man mowing his lawn. For years, the case file for the Golden State Killer grew thicker, filled with dead ends and dashed hopes. Dozens of detectives dedicated their lives to the hunt, but the killer was always one step ahead. Then, in 2001, a major breakthrough. DNA evidence officially connected the rapes in Northern California with a series of brutal murders in Southern California that were attributed to a criminal known as the original Night Stalker. This confirmed one man was behind a statewide reign of terror that included at least 13 murders and over 50 rapes between 1974 and 1986. This unified predator, nicknamed the Golden State Killer by the late writer Mache McNamara, was one of the most wanted criminals in American history. But even with his DNA profile, investigators found no match in any criminal database. The stall again, and years turned into decades. In 2016, the FBI even announced a national campaign with a $50,000 reward, hoping to finally shake a lead loose. Still, nothing. It seemed the killer, now likely in his 60s or 70s, was destined to take his secrets to the grave. Then, in 2018, everything changed thanks to a revolutionary new tool: forensic genetic genealogy. Investigators took the killer's DNA from a preserved crime scene sample and uploaded the profile to a public, open-source genealogy website called GEDmatch. This was a total long shot. They weren't looking for the killer himself, they were looking for a relative, anyone who had shared their own DNA online to trace their family tree. And they got a hit. The search returned a match not to a suspect, but to a distant relative, something like a third cousin. From there, investigators and genealogists, including the renowned C.C. Moore, began the painstaking work of building out a massive family tree, going all the way back to great-great-grandparents from the 1800s. They traced every branch forward, looking for male descendants who would have been in the right place at the right time. The search eventually narrowed to just a few men, and one stood out: a former cop in his 70s living in Citrus Heights named Joseph James DeAngelo. Investigators immediately put the quiet retiree under intense surveillance. They needed his DNA to confirm their theory. They collected items he discarded until they finally got what they needed. On April 24, 2018, they got the news they had been waiting 4 decades to hear. It was a perfect match. They had found him. The arrest of 72-year-old Joseph DeAngelo sent shockwaves across the country. Neighbors who had known him for years were stunned. This was the man they saw gardening, the quiet guy at the end of the street. How could he possibly be the monster they had feared for so long? For the survivors and the victims' families, the news was a bombshell of disbelief, relief, and overwhelming emotion. The boogeyman finally had a name and a face. In custody, the once feared predator appeared to be a frail old man, but the evidence was undeniable. Faced with a mountain of DNA evidence and the prospect of a death penalty trial, DeAngelo made a deal. On June 20, 2020, in a university ballroom converted into a courtroom to accommodate his many victims, Joseph DeAngelo pled guilty. He admitted to 13 murders and 13 counts of kidnapping, and as a part of the deal, he also confessed to being the man behind dozens more rapes and burglaries where the statute of limitations had already expired. The sentencing hearing lasted for days as survivor after survivor confronted the man who had stolen their sense of safety. They spoke of the terror that never left them and the lives he had irrevocably broken. One survivor, Chris Pedretti, who was only 15 when he attacked her, spoke of a childhood lost forever. Finally, DeAngelo himself spoke, rising from his wheelchair and saying in a halting voice, "I've listened to all your statements, and I'm truly sorry to everyone I have hurt." On August 21, 2020, Joseph DeAngelo was sentenced to multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge told him he would die in prison. The case of the Golden State Killer is a chilling story about the darkness that can hide behind an ordinary facade. It's a story of a predator who used his position of trust to become a monster, and of the terror he inflicted on an entire state. But it's also a story of relentless perseverance. It's a testament to the generations of detectives who never gave up, the survivors who refused to be silenced, and the brilliant minds who harnessed science to unmask a killer hiding in plain sight. Joseph DeAngelo's reign of terror is finally over, and he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. His case closed one of the darkest chapters in American true crime history, but for his victims, the scars will always remain. Their courage in the face of unspeakable evil serves as the final powerful word in this decades-long saga of terror and, at last, justice. What did you find most shocking about this case? Let us know in the comments below. And for more deep dives into complex cases, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications.